This build was made possible by scaledworld.net. If you want to get your build featured, fill out the feature link below and check out some other features on their site as well, as they produce a lot of nice content from builders all around the world. If you have watched the unboxing video on this kit, you might have noticed that I mentioned something about the fitment of the hood and it not being wide enough, leaving a bit of panel gaps in between the front, and I would probably be fixing that by just some paint and some clear. In the end, it turns out everything was painted, everything was cleared multiple times, and it still didn't fit quite right, so I needed to start over, fix this mistake before I could move on with the rest of the build. So the paint was removed on both sides, I added some super glue, and then used some styrene from Evergreen, just a couple strips to widen it, and then shape that to the form of the hood in order to make it fit properly and look good. So these strips are just glued on. I just cut them in a couple places in order to fit them all around those complicated shapes, and then they could be sanded down to the shape of the hood itself. With the excess length cut off on both sides, I moved on to sanding it down flush with the hood itself and conform it to shape with these sanding sticks. With the first strip now added and conformed to the piece itself, I did a quick test fit and noticed that it still wasn't really wide enough, so I added another strip in a couple places to make that wider, and then used the same process all over again for this, and of course on the other side as well. After a while and adding a couple more strips here and there, I was happy with the shape and could move on to the rest, and that is of course starting with the repaint. First, I'm using some primer on the areas that I sanded completely smooth and removed all of the paint off of, and then I started blending that in with the rest of the hood in order to make it nice and even before applying various colors. With the first coat applied, I let it sit and dry for about 5 minutes before moving on to a second coat, mainly focusing again on those same areas where all the paint was removed. And then in the end, after a couple coats, I coated the entire hood before moving on to the rest of the process, painting it silver, adding the white in a couple coats, and then finishing it with a pearl tinter before, of course, the clear coat went on. A couple more coats of primer were added to eventually even it all out. I then sanded it smooth with some 3000 grit sanding sponges before moving on to the silver. The silver is simply to make the white a bit brighter and to make it cover easier, and in the end not to really save paint but just make the color a bit more vibrant and more white and not as dull as it could be if you just apply it over the gray primer. A couple more coats of white were applied, waiting about 5 to 10 minutes in between. Once I was happy with the color and the finish it had, I moved on to applying 2 coats of pearl tinter, and then in the end finished it off with some diamond clear to nicely match the rest of the paintwork. A quick recap: we started with pretty nice big gaps on both sides, then of course did all the work and ended up with these. Now it's not perfect, but it still is a lot better than it was before, and once the underneath is painted black along with those seals on the side, it should be all nicely fixed. This build was made possible by scaledworld.net. If you want to get your build featured, fill out the feature link below and check out some other features on their site as well, as they produce a lot of nice content from builders all around the world.